In this video, we are counting down the top 10 creepiest and most remote towns in Illinois, places that are still marked on the map, but most locals pretend they don't exist. By day, they look just like any rundown small town. A few abandoned brick buildings, a lonely main street with almost no cars. But at night, every utility pole and every dark window turns into a story no one wants to be the main character in. From old psychiatric hospitals where what really chills people isn't the crumbling halls, but a handful of patients who seem to have never truly left this place, to a so-called gate to hell in local legend that they say only really wakes up after midnight. And we're starting with a place that looks at first glance like a peaceful nature preserve, right up until you find out exactly what horrifying thing is buried beneath that grass. Number 10. Savanna. In Savanna, there is an area known as Lost Mound. It sounds exactly like the kind of place that would appear on the glossy cover of a travel guide. A wide stretch of prairie, golden grass swaying in the wind, the occasional sand dune, bald eagles circling over the Mississippi in the northwestern corner of Illinois. It's easy to picture families with binoculars, hikers with cameras, and that perfect sunset shot over the river that makes everyone rush to comment goals under the photo. But the name gives it away if you listen long enough. Lost Mound is the pretty new costume. Underneath it is the old identity that locals still say with a lower voice. Savanna Army Depot. For most of the last century, this was not a refuge. It was an arsenal. A nervous system of concrete and steel that stored the kind of things you never want to see up close. For decades, trains and trucks rolled in loaded with shells, rockets, and boxes with codes that never made sense to the average worker. The depot handled conventional ammunition. It flirted with chemical agents. During the Cold War, it even helped manage tactical nuclear weapons, the sort of phrase that sounds like a punchline until you remember someone had to store them somewhere. The problem is that steel can be hauled away. The land is much harder to erase. Chemicals from explosives and solvents did exactly what chemicals always do when no one is watching. They leaked, soaked, and sank into soil and mud and groundwater. By the late 20th century, the federal government had to admit that this was not just another old base. The Environmental Protection Agency placed it on the Superfund list, which is the polite, bureaucratic way of saying we broke this place so badly that your grandchildren will still be paying to clean it up. And even now, the work is not finished. Today, if you drive the public road through Lost Mound, you see something that looks almost peaceful at first. A strip of cracked concrete cuts through high grass. On both sides, rows of earth-covered bunkers push up like buried giants, each with a rusted metal door and a number fading in the sun. Along the river, bright plastic buoys mark off sections of water. Signs on the fence do not talk about ghost stories. They say things like "Do not enter," "Hazardous area," "Unexploded ordnance." That is when the story turns dark. The creepy feeling does not come from cold spots or whispers on the wind. It comes from the thought that any smooth patch of ground under your feet might once have been packed with TNT and shells and things so toxic the maps had to be redrawn around them. Lost Mound is a landscape painting that someone finished on paper soaked in fuel. Nature is trying hard to cover the mistake. Grass grows over bunker roofs. Deer walk across the old blast zones, wildflowers lean against concrete walls. Yet the warning signs are still there, like post-it notes from the past saying, "Do not trust this calm too much." So would you really spread a picnic blanket here, let your grandkids run off the trail, and pretend those red and white signs are just decoration? Lost Mound is beautiful if you stay on the marked path. Step past the fence, and the only jump scare you need to worry about is the kind that explodes. Because at least here the danger is printed in big black letters. In the next place on this list, the damage lives inside the patients, and the crying never really stopped. Number 9. Bartonville. From a distance, Bartonville looks peaceful. A small Illinois village near Peoria, houses tucked into the trees, and on a hill above it all sits the shell of Peoria State Hospital. When it opened, this was advertised as the humane future of mental health care, No chains, no dungeon basements, fresh air and open lawns where patients could walk instead of being locked in stone cells. It sounded like a step forward, almost a promise that medicine had finally learned how to be kind. The story that draws people to that hill now does not start with a doctor. It starts with a patient the staff called Old Book. He dug the graves. He followed the funeral wagon to the hospital cemetery, stood at the back with his cap in his hands, and cried for every person lowered into the ground. Most of them had no family there. Others said he cried because someone had to, and no one else would. Then comes the part where the legend slips into something harder to explain. When Old Book died in 1910, the hospital held a funeral. More than 100 people came, including the superintendent, Dr. George Zeller. As the coffin was being lowered, people heard loud sobbing behind them. They turned and saw Old Book leaning against a tall elm at the edge of the cemetery, shaking just like always. Dr. Zeller ordered the coffin opened. Old Book was still inside. After that, the tree was called the graveyard elm, and workers claimed their tools broke or their nerves did whenever they tried to cut it down. You do not have to believe every detail to feel what sits on this hill. Around the old hospital are several cemeteries where thousands of former patients lie under small numbered markers. No names, no flowers, no visitors, only rows of metal stakes in the grass under tired trees. When the hospital closed in the 1970s, many of the buildings were torn down. A few became warehouses or offices. Some were left empty with dark windows staring over the valley. On paper, that is redevelopment. Up close, it feels like someone trying to erase the scene of a quiet disaster. So if your own mind ever started to crack, would you want real treatment? Or would you simply disappear into one more numbered grave while someone like Old Book cried for you and the rest of the world moved on? Walking this hill with a flashlight and looking for shadows is the easy part. The harder part is asking what kind of system filled these cemeteries in the first place. And if that thought already gives you chills, wait until you see a cemetery much smaller than this that many people whisper might be the most haunted in the entire country. Number 8. Bremen. On the map, Bachelor's Grove barely looks like anything. It's just a tiny square tucked inside Rubio Woods in Bremen Township, an old cemetery on the edge of the Chicago suburbs. The name itself sounds gentle, even a bit old-fashioned. Bachelor's Grove. It sounds more like a cute little inn than a place people go out of their way, winding down back roads, just to scare themselves. The odd feeling starts when you see how cut off it is. The old road that once passed the gate was closed, so now you park by the forest preserve and walk in on a narrow dirt path. No streetlights, no houses, just trees pressing closer. By the time you spot the first stone through the branches, Normal, Illinois already feels far away. With no one watching, the cemetery turned into a hangout. Teenagers looking for trouble, thrill seekers chasing a dare, vandals with beer and spray paint. Headstones were kicked over or dragged away, some thrown into the dark little pond beside the grounds. There are stories of coffins pried open just to see what was left. A place built for grief became a secret stage, and that is when the ghost stories took root. The best known is the woman in white, the Madonna of Bachelor's Grove. People say she appears with a baby in her arms, drifting between the stones, searching for a grave that might not exist anymore. Then came a photograph in 1991. In the middle of what investigators say was an empty clearing, a pale woman in an old dress sits on a stone. She looks almost solid, as if she forgot to fade when the camera clicked. The pond carries its own layer of unease. Rumors claim this water was a dumping spot for organized crime back when the big city needed quiet places to lose problems. One story describes a ghostly horse and plow rising from the surface, dragging a farmer behind it before everything snaps off like a bad channel. Stand there at dusk, with the water the color of old coffee, and the air smelling of mud, and it is easy to imagine something moving just under the surface. Bachelor's Grove is what happens when a cemetery dies twice, once for the people in the ground and once for the respect above it. So here is the question. Would you walk that dark path into the woods to see it for yourself? knowing the history of smashed stones, opened graves, mob whispers, and a patient lady in white. And if you do go in and hear footsteps behind you, you only get two options. Either something here never left, or someone else was just as curious as you are and just as foolish for being there at all. Number 7. Old Shawneetown. At the very bottom corner of Illinois, Old Shawneetown still sits beside the Ohio River like it forgot to leave. The setting is beautiful in that quiet Midwestern way. A wide river sliding past, low green hills in the distance, and right on the bank stands a stone bank building that looks more like a temple than a place you once went to ask for a loan. 2 centuries ago, this was the front door to the Illinois Territory. You came here to borrow money, trade goods, start a future. Today, it feels more like a place you pass on the way to somewhere safer. Water has always been the real mayor here. From the 19th century on, the river kept creeping in, flood after flood, each one a little higher than the last. People patched, shoveled, rebuilt, swore it would be different next time. It was not. In 1937, the Ohio finally proved the point. Floodwater rolled over the levees, swallowed streets and porches, and then the roofs. For a while, Old Shawneetown was not a town but a brown lake, with chimneys and treetops sticking out. When the water pulled back, officials made a decision that sounds almost like a horror twist. They did not just repair, they moved the town up the hill and left the old one by the river to figure itself out. That is where the place slid from history into something that feels closer to a ghost story. The piece that stayed on the riverbank never really died, but it never recovered either. A few dozen residents remained among blocks of brick. Main Street is still there, with the proud old bank, the hotel shells and storefronts standing in a row like actors frozen in the last scene. In daylight, it is strangely photogenic. Red brick against blue sky, empty sidewalks, a quiet that makes for perfect abandoned town photos. Come back at night, and it looks less like a postcard and more like the set of a low-budget end of the world movie. Streetlights buzz a tired yellow over empty intersections. Wind pushes through broken windows and down alleys where no one has lived in years. The river is only a short walk away, just a dark shine behind the levee, and you cannot quite forget that it has already been here before and it knows the way. Locals and photographers have started to call this mood Ghosts of Old Shawneetown. There is even a walking tour in that spirit. It is not about translucent figures or jump scares. The ghosts they talk about are the marks of a place that the water hit so many times that people eventually packed up not just their furniture, but their memories. Old Shawneetown is like a family album that fell in the tub and dried out. The pictures are still there. The faces are smeared. So here is the real question. Would you buy a house in a town where the biggest threat is not crime, not monsters in the woods, but a river that sits 1 block away and has a long record of winning every argument? From a drone shot, Old Shawneetown looks very aesthetic, as the internet likes to say. Just do not ask too loudly why almost everyone decided the better view is from up on the hill. Number 6. Equality. Out in the countryside near the little town of Equality, there is a brick mansion sitting alone on a low hill. If you drove by without knowing the name, you might think it was just one more historic house in farm country. Tall white columns, wide porch, trees framing the driveway, the kind of place where you can picture lanterns glowing and carriages pulling up for a party. People say big names once came here for dinners and dances. On the surface, it looks like the good old days in one photograph. The rot is all in the floor above. This is Crenshaw House, better known as the Old Slave House, in a state that liked to call itself free. The owner made his fortune at the salt works and got special permission to use enslaved labor. Then, according to court records and local testimony, he went further. Free black people and escapees were kidnapped, dragged up a steep stairway to the attic, and locked away in a row of narrow rooms while their captor arranged to sell them south. Visitors who saw it before the place was closed still remember iron rings on the floor, scarred wood, and doors that seemed too small for anyone who was supposed to leave again. It is hard to imagine the split life of this house when it was full. On one level, there was a family parlor with music and conversations about business. Directly above, behind thick walls, people listened to that music through the boards while they waited to be shipped away. Some of the modern ghost stories come from that contrast. They talk about chains dragging when no one is walking, or a voice singing softly in a part of the hall that should be empty. Whether you believe the supernatural parts or not, the architecture of cruelty is still there, baked into every small door and every bolt in the ceiling. In the 20th century, the place turned into a roadside attraction. It was branded as the old slave house and opened for tours. School buses came, tour guides pointed at shackles and told tales about shadows in the attic, while visitors posed for pictures. Then the state bought the property and shut the doors. Now the mansion sits behind fences peeling in the weather, too important to demolish and too uncomfortable to turn into a cheerful museum. Think about that the next time you romanticize old plantation-style houses. Would you actually spend a night in a bedroom downstairs, knowing that the third floor above you once held people whose names never made it into the history books? If that thought lingers a little too long, wait until you see the next place, where you do not need an old mansion at all, just a dark country road and a few bored drivers to open what locals call the road to hell. Number 5. Lebanon. On maps, Lebanon Road is just a skinny farm road near Collinsville, a strip of asphalt between woods and cornfields with a few old railroad underpasses on the way. In daylight, it looks harmless. You pass a pickup with hay bales in the back, maybe a school bus, and you barely notice the little bridges at all. It is the kind of road most people forget as soon as they turn off. At night, locals say the same road changes its name. Then it is the 7 gates of hell. The trees close in over the lanes, your headlights hit wet brick and bare concrete, and the underpasses turn into short tunnels where the dark feels too heavy. There are no streetlights, no shoulders, nowhere to stop that feels safe. Halfway along sits the spot that made the legend stick. People call it Acid Bridge, tying it to a car full of teenagers in the 1970s. Some say they had taken LSD, some say they were just drunk, others say they were only showing off. All the endings sound the same. Screeching tires, a car that went wrong on the curve, metal crushed against the rail and blood on the gravel. That part is real enough that families still flinch when they hear the name. After that crash, the dare moved in. Kids challenge each other to park on the bridge at midnight, engine off, lights off, windows down. Sit there in the dark and wait. That is when people talk about hearing cries from under the concrete or footsteps circling the car when no one is there. Some swear they saw another vehicle in the rearview mirror, headlights bright on their bumper, only to find empty road when they pulled forward. The legend gives the road its shape. There are 7 gates, mostly the old underpasses. Drive through all of them in the right order at midnight, and the last one is supposed to open onto somewhere that is not Illinois anymore. Drive back the other way and you might catch a thin, bright line of that somewhere else glowing behind you in the mirror. It sounds like nonsense in a coffee shop. It feels different when your windshield fogs and every tunnel is a slice of black with nothing beyond it but fields and trees. There are no official records of demons on Lebanon Road. There are records of wrecks. A narrow road, no lights, and a generation raised on urban legends is a loud enough curse by itself. So if your friends tell you to prove you are not scared by running the 7 gates at midnight, you might want to ask which hell you are really gambling with, the one under the pavement, or the one that shows up every time somebody makes a bad choice in the dark. Number 4. Ashmore. Ashmore Estate sits on the edge of the little farm town of Ashmore, a brick rectangle rising out of corn and pasture. If you drive by in the afternoon, it looks almost tasteful. Old red bricks, tall, narrow windows, a central entrance that would not look out of place in some vintage period movie. From a distance, you could almost believe it was an old school or a country manor that just needs a little paint. Up close, the real story starts to leak through the mortar. Long before anyone called it Ashmore Estates, this was the county poor farm. This was where you sent the people who did not fit anywhere else. The elderly with no family, the chronically sick who could still shuffle through chores, the men and women who were simply too poor, too worn down, or too inconvenient for the town to carry. They worked the fields, slept in shared rooms, and many of them died there. Some were buried on the property with only simple markers. Others slipped into the ground with nothing at all to show they had ever been alive. Later, it became a private mental health facility. New name, new paperwork, but the same basic idea. Put the people who troubled you in a building out in the countryside and hope the distance would take care of the discomfort. For a while, there were staff, routines, medication rounds, and visiting hours. Then the money thinned out. By the 1980s, the doors shut, the last patients were shipped off, and the building was left standing alone in the middle of the fields. Empty did not mean safe. Windows shattered, paint peeled in long curling strips, vandals kicked in doors and sprayed symbols on the walls. The wind learned how to play the hallways, pushing loose glass and old papers across the floors at night. Inside, the corridors run long and straight, so narrow that your own footsteps echo back at you like someone walking just behind. That was exactly the kind of stage ghost television crews were looking for. Ashmore Estates was suddenly back on camera as investigators filmed themselves in the dark. They told stories about being shoved, having their hands grabbed in empty rooms, watching small objects move on their own. What used to be a dumping ground for the poor and the mentally ill became a haunted attraction with tickets, waivers, and guided tours. Maybe that is the creepiest part. Ashmore Estates is like an old hard drive full of corrupted files that nobody wants to open but nobody dares to erase. The brick walls are what has survived the best. The things that broke first were the lives stored inside. So imagine this: would you really sleep here for a night? In a building that once served as a holding pen for everyone society did not want to look at. You can tell yourself that the footsteps in the hall at 3 in the morning are just the building settling, or a nice free sound effect for your social feed. If that thought still sounds fun, keep watching. Because Ashmore is only one building in a field. The next place on this list was an entire city of hospitals, with enough patients to fill a small town all on their own. Number 3. Manteno sits out in the farm country south of Chicago, the kind of place most drivers only notice for its water tower and the cornfields. In the 1930s, Manteno State Hospital looked impressive from above. Dozens of brick buildings, its own power plant, barns and gardens, streets laid out like a small town. Officials bragged that it was a city within a city, a modern answer to the old asylums. Patients would work outdoors, eat fresh food, live in cottages instead of cages. On paper, it sounded almost gentle. The reality earned another name. In 1939, a typhoid outbreak tore through the campus. Around 400 people became sick, and roughly 60 died. Newspapers called it Manteno madness, as if the disease itself had gone insane. The part no headline could fix was the truth under it. A place built to heal the mind could not keep its own water clean. The germs moved through pipes and kitchens while administrators kept adding more beds. Manteno grew until more than 8,000 patients were crowded into its wards. Budgets were cut, doctors were stretched thin, teenagers who had left high school early were hired, given white uniforms, and told to keep order. Imagine those halls at night, rows of beds so close you could touch the next mattress without lifting your head. People pacing back and forth because there was nowhere else to go. The air thick with disinfectant and quiet crying. Then came the treatments that sounded like progress and felt like punishment. Electroshock to jolt depression away. Injections that induced high fevers on purpose. Brain surgeries that cut pathways in the hope of calming thoughts the staff feared. Some patients improved, many more simply dimmed. By the time they left, if they ever did, they were more shell than person, like the hospital had sanded off anything complicated that used to live behind their eyes. Manteno was supposed to be a hospital. It functioned more like a factory line that reshaped human beings until they no longer caused trouble. Today, parts of the old campus have been reused. Warehouses, light industry, and a golf course share the land where those wards once stood. You can stand on a fairway and line up a shot without realizing this was once a place where electricity and fever and knives were called treatment. So here is the uncomfortable question. If you had lived in that era, Would you have walked into Manteno for help with anxiety or nightmares, knowing the cure might involve voltage or surgery? And when you drive past now and see ordinary businesses and green grass, do you feel relieved that the story is over, or uneasy that a place which industrialized pain has been folded into the landscape like nothing ever happened there at all? Number 2. ALTON. On a sunny afternoon, ALTON looks almost too charming to be scary. The town sits on the bluffs above the Mississippi near St. Louis, with limestone hills, old brick buildings, and riverfront restaurants lined up for sunset. There is a statue of Robert Wadlow, the tallest man in recorded history, smiling down at tourists taking photos. If you only saw the brochure, you would think this was the perfect place for a romantic weekend. Good food, old architecture, river views, nothing to be afraid of. That is the first trick ALTON plays. Because the official slogan people whisper here is not romantic town. It is haunted town. Under the street where you might stroll with an ice cream cone once stood the ALTON prison of the Civil War era. Around 12,000 Confederate prisoners were held there. Disease did most of the killing. Smallpox spread through the crowded cells, and around 1,500 men died. Many of the worst cases were taken to a small island out in the river, not as a hospital, but as a place to wait for the inevitable. Next time you hear a guide joke about ghost tours, remember there was once a real island of the doomed sitting in that same water. Walk up from the river, and the stories keep going. Mineral Springs Hotel looks like an old-time postcard at first glance, a historic hotel built around mineral water that was supposed to heal your body and your nerves. Inside, the past feels heavier. An empty indoor pool sits in the middle of the building, tiles stained, railings rusted, air tasting of old moisture. People talk about drownings, accidents, arguments that ended badly. Today, the hotel sells itself as a place where you might catch a glimpse of a man walking past the old pool who is no longer on the guest list. Then there is McPike Mansion, sitting on the hill like the cover of every classic haunted house story. The big brick house lost most of its furniture long ago. Windows are bare, rooms echo, paint flakes off the walls in long curls. Paranormal shows love this place. They come here with night vision cameras, call out names into the dark, and wait for a voice to answer. In ALTON, death, disease, and poverty have been repackaged as attractions with opening hours and ticket prices, and visitors line up with nervous smiles, ready to be scared for fun. Maybe that is what makes ALTON unsettling. It feels like a museum of trauma where the gift shop sells t-shirts that say, "I survived the ghost tour." The line between remembrance and entertainment is as thin as the mist that hangs over the river on a cold night. So ask yourself this: would you really relax over a craft beer on a street where thousands once suffered in filthy cells only a few steps below your chair? The guide will tell you everything is safe. Of course it is. Until the lights go low, the door creaks for no reason, and you suddenly wonder who exactly all this safety was designed for. And if a busy, haunted river town still feels a little too alive, wait until you see number 1, a place that once boomed with money and strategy and now looks like the set for the end of the world. Number 1, CAIRO. At the very bottom of Illinois, CAIRO sits on a narrow finger of land where the Ohio River runs into the Mississippi. From the levee at sunset, it looks perfect. 2 great rivers meeting, barges sliding past, brick storefronts facing the water. For a while, it really was a jewel of the confluence, a Civil War base and busy port that people once fought to control. Then the town started drowning in something uglier than water. In 1909, a black man named William James was seized by a white mob and lynched in the street. It was not hidden, it was a public show. That same night, a white prisoner was also taken from jail and killed. When people in CAIRO talk about ghosts, they do not have to invent anything. The first spirits here are the victims everyone tried to forget. By the late 1960s, that violence had only gone quiet, not away. Civil rights marches, accusations against police, and rigid segregation finally boiled over. From 1967 into the early 1970s, CAIRO saw gunfire, firebombs, and standoffs so often that shots became background noise. Walk down Main Street today and the brick facades and old signs almost look quaint, until you remember some upstairs windows once framed rifles instead of curtains. Meanwhile, the economy was collapsing. River trade shifted, rail and highway routes changed, industry left. Floods kept testing the levees and money for repairs dried up. Cairo's population fell from around 15,000 at its peak to roughly 1,500 today. Whole blocks sit empty. Public housing was torn down and families were scattered. What remains feels like a ghost city that never got permission to actually die. Drive through now and it looks like a disaster movie after the cameras stopped rolling. Stoplights still change from green to red, but most windows are boarded or broken. You pass a church here, a bar there, then long stretches of nothing but weeds and wind. This is not an abandoned attraction. People still live here, waking up each morning inside the shell of a town they remember from better days. Cairo is less a community and more a wound that never healed. If a city's soul could have PTSD, this one would be first in line for treatment. So be honest. Would you walk alone down the main street at dusk, not because of what is there now, but because of everything that happened and never really left? Houses are cheap. The real cost is learning to sleep in a place an entire system walked away from. Sometimes the scariest places are not cemeteries or haunted mansions at all, but towns that were left behind and told to remember on their own. So that is our tour through 10 places that the map still admits exist, even if the future quietly checked out a long time ago. From flooded river towns and abandoned depots to cemeteries in the woods and cities that feel like they are stuck after the end credits. Illinois is a reminder that not every story gets a happy redevelopment arc. Some spots are too poisoned, too drowned, or too haunted by history to bounce back as a cute coffee shop district. Now imagine this is not just a video and you actually had to live in one of these places for a full year. Where are you signing the lease? The cemetery in the forest? The flood town that waits for the siren every spring? Or the old military ground where the danger is baked into the dirt? And most importantly, which town in your own state deserves a seat in part 2? If you want to keep pushing into these forgotten corners, into the forbidden zones that tourism offices never print on glossy paper, drop a comment, hit subscribe, ring the bell, and tell me where we should open the next gate. This was only the first door.